yesterday, today, and forever. And a little faith in there too. Today on another episode of the Bible and 1 year with the preacher's husband. Today we're going through Hebrews chapter 11, 12, and 13. And tomorrow we're going to go through 2 Timothy chapter 1 through 4. So let's jump in and see what we get today. So in chapter 11, this is about living by faith. And this chapter compares the faith of the Old Testament fathers with the faith exercised by Christian believers. Now, faith is defined as the reality of what is hoped for and the proof of what is not seen. Now, faith is not fleeting, but substantial enough to generate confidence. The Greek word for proof indicates an inner conviction that is not based on visible matters. So, to please God requires faith, and one must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. And He is there, and He does respond. I know this for a fact. I hope you do too. Throughout this chapter, though, the author provides examples of people in the Old Testament who exercised faith. He focused most heavily on Abraham and Moses, and then, of course, to complete the list with a crescendo, he recounted an inspiring litany of the fruit of faith displayed in the virtuous life, faithful death, and anticipated resurrection of numerous Old Testament heroes. Now, although their faith was approved, they did not receive what God had promised. The purpose of this delay was to ensure that they would not be perfected apart from Jesus Christ. So then we jump into chapter 12, right? The call to endurance, to endure all of the bad things that are going to happen. Now, because Jesus Christ is the source and the perfecter of the Christian faith, the author called on Christians to keep their eyes on Jesus. The Christian who has faith will lay aside every sinful weight and run towards Christ. Just as Jesus endured the cross, despising the shame, in order to attain the joy of rejoining the Father on His throne, so should Christians run their race with that same endurance. So, we get to section here, chapter 12, verses 3 through 13. And the Son became a human being in order to unite Himself with His believing brothers and sisters. The Son can then bring believers into the presence of the Father, who will disciple them as sons. And he cited here in verse 5, Proverbs 3, verses 11 and 12. And the author here argued that just as the readers had accepted discipline from their human fathers, so too should they receive discipline from the Father of spirits. Now, God does not discipline His sons to harm them, but to bless them. The benefit of the Father's discipline is fellowship in His holiness and bearing the peaceful fruit of righteousness. We get to the next section, verse 14 through 29. This is basically a warning against rejecting God's grace. And the church does not really exist on Mount Sinai, terrifying to the Israelites, of course, in both what they heard and what they saw here when they hear this. Rather, the church is moving toward Mount Zion, where it should dwell in the presence of God, Jesus, the angels, and the righteous people who have been perfected by the sprinkled blood of Christ, as it said. And the author urges the reader here to persevere in faith. Though God will shake heaven and earth, believers can trust they are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, as it said. And then we will move into the last chapter, 13, the final chapter of the book. Here, the author, who I think is Timothy, that's my choice here, he addresses the benefits and responsibilities of life lived in the church. Now, in verses 1 through 6, under the general theme allowing brotherly love to reign within the church, the author addressed 5 specific activities in which Christians should engage. The first one was showing hospitality towards strangers. Number 2 was to visit those in prison. Number 3 was to minister to the mistreated. Number 4 was to honor marriage. And number 5 was to free themselves from the love of money, right? Now, the author in verses 7 through about 19, he addressed 7 different ways, 7 ways in which Christians should revere church leaders. So the first way is Christians should observe the lives of their leaders and imitate their faith. Number 2, Christians should remember that Christ is always the same and judge every teaching according to the gospel. Number 3, Christians should recognize their church may not be appreciated by the world because the Christian community is gathered to worship their Lord, whom the world despises. Number 4, Christians should continually offer their own sacrifice of praise in appreciation for the sacrifice of Christ by confessing his name. Number 5, the church should be active in doing good works and sharing with one another. Number 6, Christians should obey their leaders and submit to them because they are accountable to God for caring for Christian souls. And number 7, Christians should pray for their leaders to have clear consciences, conducting themselves with honor in everything. In the last few verses, 20 through 25, I think the original writer ends at the end of verse 21 with the amen, and then Paul endorses this through verse 25. But basically, it's recounting the sacrificial work of Christ, and there's a prayer that God would equip them to do his will. And then, of course, they ended his message with this blessing, grace be with you all, which I think is from Paul because that's how he ended all of his letters. So I hope this has helped you with your studies. If it has, click that like button, subscribe button, of course click the little jingle bell so you get notified the next time I upload a video. And if you're rumbling with me on Rumble, hit the little boxing glove, and I will see you again tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. See you then.